Brethren, the story of a great recovery. Part 1, England and Wales. Chapter 14. Bridford Mills Assembly. The origin of the testimony at Bridford Mills in Devon may be traced to the conversion of William Surridge somewhere about the year 1864. Saved while listening to an untutored chapel preacher, he soon afterwards found an outlet for his zeal for the Master in commencing services in a schoolroom close to the mills. Unable to preach himself, he bought a volume of printed sermons, and these he read with evident success, for the people continued to come to the schoolroom in larger numbers. This gave him courage to take the Bible and preach the gospel as the Lord gave him liberty. Thus he continued, and in course of time the work bore fruit as one and another were brought to know the Lord. With no one to point the way, William sought guidance from the Scriptures, for the young converts required to be fed and tended. Thus he was awakened to his responsibility of not only preaching the gospel but also to care for the flock. So he sent for the creeds of the different religious denominations, that he might decide for himself which was the proper course to take. But the more he compared each with the Word of God, the greater appeared his difficulty in arriving at a solution to the problem which exercised his soul. Eventually he was brought in touch with a few Christians at a village not far distant. Here a little company had been gathered through the instrumentality of Robert Gribble, and on the first day of the week they came together, as did the apostles, to remember the Lord's death. Mr. Surridge also discovered that there was a similar company of Christian believers in Exeter, and to his great joy he found that both of these were doing just what he had longed to do. The result was that brethren from Exeter were invited to preach at Bridford occasionally, and thus the light came to that district in Devonshire. But it is not to be supposed that the enemy would allow this new departure to pass unchallenged, for very soon opposition to the truth for a time sought to hinder the work. Such men as Henry Dyer, Samuel Blow, and others equally well known at that period, lent a helping hand in ministering to the spiritual needs of those who were faithful to the word, so that from that time onward the work grew apace, for many hearing believed and were baptized. On the Sunday morning when the first baptism was to take place, at which William Surridge, the schoolmistress and others were publicly to confess the Lord, Mr. Surridge was ill in bed. So eager was he to witness the ordinance that he managed to leave his bed, and arranged for an armchair to be placed by the side door leading to the orchard where the baptism was to take place. When the last person was entering the water, he said to the brother standing by him, "Give me your arm," and with his help he walked over to where the company had assembled and was baptized, without suffering any hurt. A crowd of people had gathered along the sides of the mill stream to see this novel sight. Among them was the owner of a tool factory, who afterwards said, "I came to laugh, but went home to cry, and the next time was baptized myself." The schoolroom soon became too small, and in the year 1875 it was pulled down and rebuilt, the expense of the work being borne by William Surridge. 6 years later a further addition was made in which the little assembly, consisting of poor working-class people, expressed a desire to have fellowship in meeting the expense. Of the gathering together of the money to pay the builder's bill, a brother relates an interesting story. In the assembly was a working man and his wife with a family of 3 or 4 young children. He was earning no more than 10 shillings a week, and had saved just that amount to pay the shoemaker, who was to call the following week. They both had it laid on their heart to give 10 shillings towards the building, but what about the shoemaker? The matter was taken to the Lord in definite prayer, and as the couple rose from their knees they felt constrained to give the money to the Lord, which they did. Next morning, White's my friend, while following his employment, John knocked a half-sovereign out of a lump of earth with his spade. Thus, the same Lord who could guide Peter to the fish containing the required piece of money, could guide John to the lump of earth in which was hidden the shining half-sovereign. And so God was honored, the shoemaker provided for and the family blessed. The Lord continued to prosper the work, and in 1900 the existing building was demolished and a much larger hall erected on the same site, the position of the original schoolroom, where a faithful testimony is still maintained. The work at Bridford Mills has really been unique, as there are not more than a dozen houses anywhere in the vicinity of this large hall, the nearest village being about a mile distant. When I first visited the assembly, nearly 40 years ago, White's Mr. H. E. Marsam, it was indeed an interesting sight to see the country people on Lord's Day, with their carts and hampers, carrying provisions for their families who had come to worship. A feature of the present hall, reminiscent of those days, is a kitchen range provided in the back room, for the warming up of the dinners the brethren and their wives brought with them. With the advent of the motorcar, this is now a thing of the past. During the last 50 years, the welfare of the young has been the constant care of F. W. Surridge, a son of the founder of the Assembly, his first Sunday school class being gathered from the surrounding district. This initial experiment resulted in a work which quickly grew up, and in a comparatively short time there was a properly arranged Sunday school with the names of 130 children on the roll. Mr. Surridge also instituted a Sunday School Teachers' Conference, which has been held annually with growing interest. In September 1938, some 400 teachers and Sunday school workers gathered at Bridford Mills to celebrate the Jubilee.